one more minute. Hey, Lynn. Anything you'd like to talk about tonight? It's my pleasure. Keeps me on track too. All right, so let me get us muted. And let's just get started while people kind of pour in. So as always, if anybody has anything that they'd like to talk about tonight or to have addressed, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, we will just see what comes. Here everybody comes. All right. So you just arrived at a meditation class. Take a moment and just shift. Shift into this moment. Let your eyes take in the entire room. Use your listening to take in all the sounds at once. It's amazing how just that, even before it's had time to start building up some energy, provides a buffer from the environment around you. Can you feel that? Really do it. Really shift your attention. Take in the whole room at once, periphery, everything in front of you, and then do the same with your hearing. Fill the space with your awareness. And just notice the shift in your feeling body when you do that. You know, here in the United States, we're having storms. And I'm really sensitive to storms. My body always knows when they're coming. It can feel it. It's not a great feeling. And we've had them kind of going up and down for many, many, many nights in a row. So it's just been many nights of that feeling. And when a bad feeling comes, as humans, our inclination is to protect ourselves from it, even just subtly, even just that kind of ducking your head to get through something vibe. But it's interesting how the answer is actually to just open right up in the face of it, to show up in the face of it. That's where the protection is. That's where the buffer is. You know, we've talked in the past about how we ask the wrong questions, you know, in our head. And because our mind just kind of pulls answers out of our subconscious, whether they're right or wrong, we need to start asking better questions so that our mind will start presenting better answers. But one of the best questions that I've had you guys ask before is just, what if this is maybe fine? How is this maybe not a problem at all? How is this fine exactly the way it is? And a question like that is a question that first accepts what is. It shows up for it and then leaves a door open to actually have arisings that deal with it. But before those answers even come, there is that feeling of relief and buffer because your subconscious is working on something different. Meditation is training for life. The meditative state feels so separate from your life because it's not run by the story, whereas everything else is. But every skill it takes to step into the meditative state is actually a skill you need to live your life properly. It's only when you stop avoiding that the things you're avoiding soften and become manageable. Showing up. For whatever's here in this moment. Now it looks like a bunch of people came in. If any of you have anything you'd like discussed tonight, feel free to put it in the chat. Otherwise, let's step into meditation. Attention at the forehead and crown. Let your eyes take in the entire room in front of you. You can let your physical eyes just land on a specific spot, but your visual attention should be in soft focus, taking in the entire room at once. Listening to everything in this moment at once. Feeling your way into this entire moment. Notice the shift that creates. And then let's abide there. Because as you abide there, for the first time, maybe all day, you've stopped dumping out all your energy. And you can just start filling up like a battery. And as you show up for this moment, you can bring your body into it by watching your breath. To just watch your breath is concentration. To maintain an awareness of your breath in this moment is meditation. It doesn't have to be perfect. Show up for it exactly as it is. You don't have to be perfect. Show up as you. With nothing to hide. No part of you held in check. Wide open and available. Nothing to defend. Nothing to resist. Just you in this moment, breathing. a sense, there are two ways to move through life. Two ways that I keep bumping up against. The difference between these two ways, you see it at different octaves, different levels of life, all the way up to how you approach your spirituality, all the way down to how you approach your job. One way is as simple as the breathing that you're doing. It's just showing up for the moment and trying to be useful. As simple as that is, in this world, it's one of the harder ways. Because the people who haven't chosen that way like to take advantage of that. Those people are following a different way. Lately, I've been calling that way the zero-sum game. A game where you're trying to win, where you're trying to get to the top of the hill relative to everybody else. I deal with this, I've told you before, I run the guidelines in my field, so I work with a lot of different clinicians, and the majority of clinicians are just trying to be useful. They just want to move the science forward. They care about patient care. But I have other groups that are playing a zero-sum game. They're jockeying for position with each other. They are trying to move their specific modality of practice to the top of the mountain, to the king of the hill. And when you watch how they deal with each other, because I've had to sit in meetings, everything is a negotiation about where you're going to stand on that hill. And the person who is currently at the top is seen as the person with the power who can make your climb easier or, switch you out with somebody. And the thing that's so shocking when I have conversations with them, the thing that I'm most struck by, is that almost everything they want you to do, everything they want you to change in your position, is something that does absolutely nothing for patient care. It doesn't improve patient care. It doesn't move the science forward. All it does is help their positioning on the hill. Their referential power in life is up here. Socially, they're people that are well known and have been at the top of the hill for a long time. And it drives them crazy that they can't just make me do whatever they want. But the thing is, they haven't realized that the only way to win at a zero-sum game is not to play. Because if you don't play, you suddenly become the useful person in the room. The person that can improve patient care, that can move science forward. And so there's a protection there. This is no different than what I said earlier about when you avoid things in the moment, you can't get rid of them. You're stuck in them. You know, these people, by avoiding losing, finding themselves having to constantly defend their wins, which is actually a loss. And they can't compete with anybody who just quite simply is not playing that game. Why do you do the things that you do? Is it to position you? Is it to gain control over someone else? Or is it just a natural remark of the moment? Is it just because that's what the moment's calling for? That's what the moment's pulling out of you? Every week I sit down with very little idea of what I'm going to say to you, but it doesn't matter, because whatever the moment pulls forward is what we'll talk about. If I don't have something to say and I fall silent for a period of time, that's fine too. I wasn't here to win your adoration. I sit down and make myself useful. But those two walks through life are vastly different from each other. Even the way you walk a spiritual path has that schism in it. You know, in shamanism, they say, you know, at some point in your learning, you come up to a crossroads where you have to make a choice. You know, as you really, really sit and let that power and energy fill you and you become clearer about how life works, you find little abilities develop, you know, little things that are special, depending usually on kind of what your world asks of you. You know, in my world, it was healing abilities and things like that. Weird things with the weather. But at some point, you end up having to make a choice where you're either going to go further down the road of being more and more different and special and good at manipulating the world around you, which is a path. You know, a path where you're changing things constantly to your liking. Or you choose a path of freedom from that, where you don't cling to any of it and you just let it all open right up. The path of super special, they called that the path of high adventure. And then the other was called the path of freedom. But it's a different octave of the same teaching. Another octave of the same teaching is when you sit on a meditation cushion and you start to feel pain. You know, I'm sure most of you at some point have sat on a floor in meditation, maybe with a group of people so you weren't in control of when you got up, and you noticed the pains and things like that that come with that. Well, when you're really dedicated to that, you have to learn how to deal with it. And what you ultimately learn, in the beginning, is people are trying to get away from the pain. They start putting little cushions under their left leg, and they get these contraptions of cushions to try and make it through a 45-minute or an hour-long session without the blinding pain that comes. And I've talked to you guys before about how on my trek the answer for that came when I just suddenly was not going to push the pain away anymore. What if it were just okay to be in blinding pain? The day I had that thought and meant it, the pain disappeared, and I could sit as long as I wanted from there on out. That's freedom. Letting it all be what it is. Showing up with it exactly the way it is. And not needing to manipulate. That's the path of freedom. And the reason I'm telling you this is because every minute of your day, you're doing one or the other. It might not always be as overt as some of the stories I tell you. Sometimes it's very subtle. But even just that inward groan is a resistance to what's in front of you. I'm not saying I never groan. But when I do, that's a part of me that is manipulating. And I think we're all old enough and have been around the block long enough to know that that inward complaint has never actually solved a problem. I think the first step in true forward movement spiritually is at least an early version of choosing that path of freedom, of understanding that you're going to live your best in a state of non-resistance, and that the forward movement comes from actually letting go of the resistance. It's not strengthening your arms to pull yourself forward. It's releasing the part of you that is holding back. That's the first major step. Acceptance, if you want to get trite with it. From there, then, there's another distinction to be made. You can live in a state of acceptance by walking away from all the things you can't accept. A lot of people attain their enlightenment on the top of a mountain because they've gotten away from all the people that push their buttons, and they're able to wake up. And it's a legitimate awakening. If they come back down the mountain, they're a mess again. But they're a mess that also knows what's real. So that's one road, that's one fork after you've chosen the path of freedom, is you can Align yourself with exactly what you would want. Align yourself with a life that you have no reason to resist. You know, that's what a lot of the manifestation people are trying to do. But there's an even higher path just to the right of that fork, which is stepping in to whatever is useful, recognizing your resistance and finding a way to work with that, the same way you found a way to work with the pain in your body. You know, sticking with it, stepping into it wide open. What resolves that feeling of resistance? And just feeling your way through it. There's so much learning and growth on that path. I haven't seen the end of it. I don't know if there is one. Anyone who ever told me they were at the end of it were not upon closer inspection. Answers I found to that path well, you realize when you're walking that path that the story is the hardest part of it, right? All your resistance is bound up in the story. You know, for me, a lot of times there's just very toxic people that I deal with. And, you know, people like that create a past with you. It's a lot to let go of. What I work on now is taking all of that and distilling it into just a to-do list. You know, you step into the story long enough to figure out what you have to do to be useful to it, what you have to do to actually move things forward. And cleansing that list of the story so that you can still be functional in that world. Imagine what you could accomplish. Imagine how much you could get done if you didn't have to drag yourself through the story. But again, it just comes down to how you approach each moment. If you're suffering, and we all do, it is, I'm going to say always, because you're in resistance. That suffering is actually an ineffective effort to manipulate what's in front of you. Don't believe me? Show up for it with no resistance and watch it lift right off of you. Don't take my word for it. Show up. See for yourself. I don't require faith. You can see it for yourself. One way works and one way doesn't. And when you've seen that one way works, it just becomes about staying awake to whether or not you're going that way or that way. So that's my teaching for tonight, I think. Are there any questions about that or any but what ifs? Okay. Why don't we go back into meditation then for the rest of the session? Yeah, Lynn, for the recording, she's saying I have a storm of feelings too, edgy. It's just that time, there's tides of astral activity that kind of exists underneath the current of life right now, and they've been relentless. It's been several days of it. It'll pass. It has to. All right, let's head into meditation. And Lynn, any feelings you have, just show right up for them. Let them touch you. Give them their space. It's okay. Attention at the forehead and crown. Stretch yourself into the environment that you're in. Just be present for this moment while you breathe. Keep your heart available. Leave the time to me. What if you just completely let go of everything that comes after this? What if you have no future? How much of this could you experience right now? Give me the height of your openness. Live your highest moment right now. You don't need to come to a close for a session to end. It's better. Feels like it's going to take energy, but it actually makes energy. Your resistance to losing energy is what's depleting you. Let the floodgates open. even that thing you did to open back up. That shift in feeling as you felt your way to being more open. That's what you work with all day long. You show up for things the way they are, and you feel your way into a state of release. Free engagement with what is. And you'll find it brings you most of the things that you're afraid of losing. It resolves your reasons for resisting. But don't take my word for it. Live it. See for yourself. This week, I want you to approach your moment through the lens of being useful, available. And I want you to notice when you're not. You will always be one or the other. You'll either be trying to weakly manipulate a moment, or you will be flowing and useful in the moment. It's really not a spectrum either. You may flip back and forth, but in any given moment you're coming from one place or the other. See if you can catch it. And when you do, see if you can feel your way back into availability. It's just a simple state of willingness. All right, any questions? Oh, yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry, I have an unrelated question.
Okay.
The past 5 or 6 weeks, my whole family's just been getting sick one after the other, and as soon as one person gets well, another person gets sick. And I feel like you had mentioned something at some point to me that this upcoming year would have a lot of that going on. Can you say anything about that?
Yeah. So everybody's getting sick right now. Literally, I mean, we have 2 people in my department with COVID. There are times in life when there are currents of things that move through, and these are energetic currents, and you don't really need to understand them in order to deal with it, right? I mean, they have physical manifestations, and so those manifestations will be things like an entire country becoming politically polarized in ways that, you know, one side can't understand the other, or, you know, just an entire pandemic hitting the world, or phases then after that, like we're in right now, where there are just tides of destructive energy moving through. And, it's nothing new. It's nothing to be alarmist about, really. It's just a part of life. But we've been in a particularly long one for a while. It gets little dips where things get better. But those of us who are sensitive, we can feel it. It's like every night going to bed and there's just a feeling of something is really, really wrong, or sustained dread with no reason to feel dread. Things like that. But the best thing to do in times like that is to kind of pull back a little bit, to not be super visible. But honestly, what it takes to actually stay safe in something like that for most people is to control your exposure. Like, it's not a great time for kids to just be running around interacting indiscriminately. For me, I'm sure everybody thinks I'm very rude, because if I get into an elevator and 3 other people get into that same elevator, I step out of the elevator, because there's just no reason. Everyone's getting sick, and there's no reason to lose a week of your life, So you just bob and weave and find your way through it. I don't think it's anything to be too alarmed by, but it's just that kind of a time. One thing that I have found helps is lighting a candle and keeping it by my bed, but don't do that if there's any chance you're going to burn your house down. I have a very protected little jar that I use for that. If you have kids, you want to be careful with that. Anything else? Okay, guys. I will be here next Thursday, and I wish you all a great week. Okay, bye.
Thank you.